This is a poster of Group 5. Our project name is Rushing to Appear Virtuous, Time Pressure and Social Desirability.
This experiment is based on a previous study called Rushing to Appear Virtuous, Time Pressure Increases Socially Desirable Responding by John Protzko, Claire M. Zedelius, and Jonathan W. Schooler, which investigated the effect of time pressure on socially desirable responses outside social interactions. The study found that prosociality increases when decisions are made under time pressure. The scenarios used in the original study consisted of two categories, socially desirable and socially undesirable, and allowed for a true or false response. We expanded this design. We integrated two additional categories of high and moderate moral corruption and used the Likert scale from 1 to 5 as a response mechanism. The main objective of this study is to evaluate the effect of time pressure on socially desirable responses under the 4 categories. Our research question was, does time pressure increase socially desirable responses? We tested 2 hypotheses. 1, people tend to give socially desirable responses under time pressure, and 2, people tend to give more socially desirable responses as the level of moral corruption rises.
Our intent is to test whether time pressure will affect the social desirability of participants' responses, which it did in the original survey. However, our survey takes into account both the effect of time pressure and the degree of moral corruption on social desirability of responses. We designed our survey with 4 categories, 10 scenarios in each category in a random sequence. While control group are required to respond after 13 seconds of viewing and consideration for each scenario, experimental group is forced to respond within 13 seconds per scenario. To respond to each question, participants need to rate scenarios on a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. There are 84 participants in total, 39 in control group and 45 in experimental group. They are selected through prolific platform randomly without gender, age, or sex specification.
So here's a procedure part of our ED2, and we first made our surveys on the Qualtrics website, and then we used the Qualtrics links to the prolific system, and the participant needs to click yes on the consent form page, and then they can continue study. And they have to answer question on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, and those are strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. The answer should be based on their real condition. And they are randomly assigned to the experimental or control group, and the experimental group, they have to answer the question under 13 seconds, and in the control group, they will need to think more than 13 seconds. And then they will submit all the answers on the prolific system, and then they can get the payment.
Analyses and results. The data we received was initially unsorted, so we grouped it into the 4 categories: high moral corruption, moderate moral corruption, socially undesirable, and socially desirable. After that, we uploaded the organized data to SPSS for analysis. We selected an independent t-test for the time pressure variable because it allowed us to determine whether the differences in means from the time pressure and non-time pressure groups could be considered statistically significant, whereas we selected two-way ANOVA because it allowed us to investigate whether the moral corruption level influences the socially desirable responding. The results of the independent t-test are shown in figures 1 and 2 below. In figure 1, we can see that the control group, which was untimed, had a higher average mean. Now, remember, the questions were given on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the most socially undesirable. As such, by comparing the means, we can conclude that time pressure increases socially desirable responses from participants to an extent that can be considered statistically significant.
Then, we pursued an SPSS analysis and performed a two-way ANOVA on the data we collected to analyze whether the moral corruption level influenced socially desirable responding. First, we found that there was no interaction between 4 categories, and Levine's test showed that the variance were equal. This illustrates that people reacted to the scenarios in the same way in both groups. Second, according to Figure 3, results show that people tend to have higher socially desirability scores under higher moral corruption levels, but it still corresponds with the result we got from the time pressure effect. In other words, under the same level of moral corruption, people under time pressure still have higher socially desirability scores than those without time pressure. And under different time conditions, people got higher social desirability scores as levels of moral corruption rising. Third, we found that there was a significant difference between each category. Type 1, which refers to the high moral corruption category, resulting in higher ratings compared to the other three categories, as we can see in Figure 3.
The overall results of the survey confirmed our hypothesis that time pressure increases socially desirable responses, which coincides with the predicted results of the referenced study. Also, as the level of moral corruption rises, people tend to give more socially desirable responses as well. These results were confirmed by statistical analysis, where we found that the differences in social desirability between time and untimed group, as well as the effect of high moral corruption, were enough to be considered statistically significant. However, the moderate moral corruption's effect on social desirability is not obvious. We can conclude from our experiments that time constraints increase the social desirability of answers. When people were made to react to different scenarios, their quickest tendency is to respond in a socially acceptable manner. When people were given enough time to consider, however, they were more likely to be honest with themselves. Furthermore, people tend to demonstrate strong opposition to highly moral corrupt situations, both with and without time constraint.
That's all for our presentation. Thank you.